Okay, it's time to start. Thank you so much for being here today on this Biodiversa Plus webinar on the IPBES scoping report of the second global assessment. So today we are very happy to welcome Rainer SODTKE from Biodiversa Plus. He's going to introduce Biodiversa Plus shortly. And also Satomi YOSHINO from the IPBES Secretariat is going to introduce IPBES for the people here who maybe don't know it very well. And the main part of this webinar is going to be handled by Josef SETTELE, who was the chair of the first global assessment and who is today part of the MEP task force of the second global assessment scoping. He is going to do a brief presentation of the first global assessment and lesson learned, and also a presentation of the scoping report of the second global assessment. And we will have time for questions and answers afterwards, and a short introduction to how to become a reviewer from Typhaine here from Biodiversa and FRB. Thank you very much. And Rainer, I leave you the floor.
Thank you so much, Constance, for this nice introduction, and very well welcome also from my side to this joint Biodiversa plus IPBES webinar on the scoping report of the second global assessment. Next slide, please. So you already introduced me. I'm co-chair of the Biodiversa Plus European Biodiversa Partnership. I'm based in Germany at the Laureau Project Management Agency in Bonn. Next slide, please. Biodiversa Plus, the European Biodiversity Partnership, is a partnership of different actors from the research realm and the policy realm. So we bring together more than 80 partners from 41 countries all over Europe and a bit beyond. The partners form mainly research actors from Ministry of Research and Research Funding Organizations, and policy actors, mainly Ministries of Environment and Environmental Protection Agencies. Next slide, please. And our aim is manifold, so we have different work streams, and of course one of our main activities is to promote and support joint research and innovation programs and projects. You see on the left-hand side our different work streams. One additional activity, of course, is to promote and support transnational biodiversity monitoring. We want to build up a joint transnational monitoring center within Europe. We're also working on promoting and supporting nature-based solutions and valuation of biodiversity in the private sectors. And furthermore, we also want to better connect our research programs and projects to policy. And finally, we have also work stream on internationalization of European research and innovation. And within this activity, we not only want to cooperate with research and innovation actors beyond Europe, we also want to align with different international bodies. And of course, IPBES is one of the main bodies we want to cooperate with, and we're cooperating. On the right side, you see the partnership has a duration of 7 years, starting in 2021. And we're aiming to reach this ambitious target of spending more than 800 million euro in our community, combining in-cash and in-kind resources from our partners. Which is 2/3 of our funding activities, covering research activities and 1/3 biodiversity monitoring. And all these activities are co-funded by the European Commission with around 165 million euros in our duration. Next slide, please. Our work is based on our strategic research and innovation agenda. You see the structure here on the right. We have different topical themes and cross-cutting themes. And mainly we are implementing these topical themes by so-called flagship programs, and beyond that with different calls, for example, for research projects. So our first call in the partnership was covering biodiversity protection. We have also a running call on biodiversity restoration. One of our next calls will also cover this topical theme. Then we have a topical theme on transformative change, and we're going for a call on societal transformation and biodiversity later this year. We have a topical theme on European Union's global action, and two cross-cutting themes: better knowledge on biodiversity and its dynamics, and a cross-cutting theme on better knowledge for nature-based solutions, where we also had a joint call on that one. Next slide, please. All these work streams are based on the European Biodiversity Strategy to 2030. And with this, we want to cover different objectives, so specific objectives. So we want to implement an actionable knowledge to tackle different drivers of biodiversity loss. We want to improve our activities on monitoring of biodiversity and the services across Europe. We want to strengthen the evidence base for nature-based solutions, and making, of course, also the business case for conservation and restoration of ecosystems. And finally, also to support from a science perspective the policy-making processes. And all these general objectives fit very much to the international objectives to deploy nature-based solutions, to contribute to different nature's contributions to people, and of course also to the Sustainable Development Goals. And all of these fit in the 2050 vision of the UN Convention of Biological Diversity. Next slide, please. Just a few ideas what we are doing. So I already mentioned the calls. By now we launched 12 calls, most of them together with other initiatives, with joint programming initiatives, FATCHE and Water, for example. Most of them were co-funded by the European Commission, and we also had one international call on together with the Belmont Forum. And with these, we were able to fund around 150 transnational projects and more than 1,000 research teams. And we could, allocate around 250 million euros in total, and including around 180 million euros in cash money. Next slide, please. I already mentioned our activities on biodiversity monitoring. You see here our biodiversity monitoring pilots, which aim to operationalize and test new approaches and protocols to reinforce the collaboration at the European level on biodiversity monitoring, and also to assess the deployment of harmonized transnational biodiversity monitoring schemes. We launched 3 so-called pilots in the first instance, which are marked green on the right side, on invasive alien species and soil biodiversity, and also on transversal activities around governance aspect. And we're just launching a new set of biodiversity monitoring pilots at the moment, for example, covering habitats and marine biodiversity issues. Next slide, please. And one important example of our work, of course, is to link science and policy in our different science policy interfacing activities. And we put here a slide showing you where we interact in the work stream of producing knowledge. So one important aspect is, of course, to interact before our projects produce knowledge, so to co-identify research needs through consultations with decision makers, with practitioners, stakeholders, so you here actually in the process. And we also support this with knowledge synthesis and desk studies. And we have activities during the production of knowledge, so during the work of research, policy, and practitioners. We set up communities of practice, for example, do capacity building workshops, science policy forum. We cooperate with the European Commission in its science service and different other science policy platforms, and of course also with the development of knowledge hubs. And for example, we launched one knowledge hub on biodiversity restoration only last week. And finally, we also feed the decision-making design and implementation with the production of tools for decision makers and identify and analyze and valorize our work with policy briefs and other products. Next slide, please. And here you see the big variety of initiatives and projects we are cooperating with on the biodiversity side, on the left side, and of course, the IPBES is really at the heart of this activity, but we also cooperate with lots of other initiatives, like, for example, the Knowledge Center for Biodiversity, Network Nature, IUCN, and many more. And on the right side, you see we're also cooperating with other European biodiversity, other European partnerships, of course, in the realm of the environmental sector. So from the agricultural sector, for example, the water sector, but also really beyond that. So I think that's it from my side. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Rainer, for this very precise introduction to Biodiversa Plus. Just before Satomi, you could introduce us IPBES. I will precise that there is a icon for questions and answers at the bottom of your screen. Don't hesitate to write down questions there anytime needed, so we can sort them and register them for the end of the webinar. Thank you so much. And please, Satomi, the floor is yours to introduce IPBES.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Satomi Yoshino. I'm Program Management Officer at the IPBES Secretariat. Let me introduce IPBES. So IPBES stands for Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Its mission is to strengthen knowledge foundations for better policy through science, for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, long-term human well-being, and sustainable development. It was established in 2012 as an independent intergovernmental body. It currently has 146 member states. IPBES structure. As you can see on the right-hand side, we have the plenary, which is the decision-making body. Underneath, we have the Bureau and Multidisciplinary Expert Panel. We call it MEP. The Bureau oversees all administrative functions, and it comprises chair, 4 vice chairs, and 5 additional officers, while MEP oversees all scientific and technical functions. It has 5 experts from each of the 5 UN regions, and we have here Seth with us today, who is also a member of the MEP. And expert groups and task forces, they are the selected scientists and knowledge holders. They carry out assessments and other deliverables. And finally, we have the Secretariat, including Technical Supports Unit. It implements IPBES work and administration, supports plenary, bureau, and MEP. It is led by Executive Secretary Anne Ladigodley. The first work program of IPBES produced a total of 11 reports involving 2,800 experts. In 2016, the pollination assessment and scenarios and models assessment were launched. And 2 years later, IPBES had 4 regional assessments, as well as land regulation assessment. In 2019, the first IPBES global assessment was launched, and 2022, sustainable use and values assessments were approved. And last year, the invasive alien species assessment was just launched. I just wanted to highlight that IPBES assessments do have an impact. For instance, IPBES assessments were used as a basis to develop the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And similarly, in 2020, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the Global Risk Report started to rank biodiversity as one of the top 5 risks to business based on the global assessment. There are quite a few interesting other examples, so I put the link on the slides where you can see our impact tracking database called Track. So if you have time, please visit and have a look to see what other impact IPBES had made. Now we have the rolling vote program up to 2030. Why rolling? Because it was first adopted at IPBES 7 and 3 additional topics were added at IPBES 10 last year. It has 6 prioritized topics as well as 6 objectives. Topic 1, assessing the interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food, health, energy, and climate change, so-called Nexus assessment. Topic 2, transformative change. Topic 3, business and biodiversity. Topic 4, the second global assessment. Topic 5, monitoring. Topic 6, spatial planning and ecological connectivity. But it is not only about assessment, but it also has different objectives. For instance, objective 2 on by building capacity. So this is sort of known for fellowship program, which is available for early career scientists. And objective 3, strengthening the knowledge foundations. It has 2 sub-objectives. 3A, knowledge and data. 3B, indigenous and local knowledge. Objective 4, supporting policy. Underneath it has policy support tools and methodologies, which focuses on uptake of completed IPBES assessments. 4B, scenarios and models. Objective 5, communicating and engaging. Objective 6, improving the effectiveness. This is my last slide, indicating the indicative timeline up to 2030 for ongoing and future IPBES assessments. We are in between IPBES 10 and IPBES 11, where we have 3 ongoing assessments, which include Nexus and transformative change. They are at their last stage of assessment development, and business and biodiversity assessment has just started since late last year. And regarding the future assessments, second global assessment, we are at the scoping stage as highlighted on the slide, and monitoring assessment will soon start. As you might have received our notification a few days ago, announcing that we finally have 3 selected co-chairs. So they will organize their author team and start their work soon. And finally, spatial planning assessment will start from early next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Satomi, for this really clear introduction to IPBES. And now we are going to leave you the floor so that on the presentation of the first global assessments and the presentation of the scoping report of the second global assessment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here. And really a pleasure to give some updates, information on the things we have been doing and we will be doing in the near future, in the next years, I would say. First of all, summarizing the global assessment, the first one is a kind of huge task, and I don't go into any detail. Maybe you just take the next slide. which is just the headline. Next one, please. And and that's the front page. Many of you might have seen it. It exists in many different languages, 6 AON languages and around, I think, 10 others. You have this kind of summary of policymakers from the global assessment available. So it can be nicely and widely spread, and it was widely spread. Next slide. And it's just a placeholder here for the impact. Here is the media response, which was really manifold, lots of uptakes. Some of the headlines have been, for example, the 1 million species threatened by extinction in the next decades if we don't counteract, which is the complete information, because many people just mentioned 1 million species threatened by extinction, but there's no timeline and no option to counteract, which is quite important. We had many, let's say, components there, analysis of the direct, indirect drivers. There have been some famous graphs which were used in many places. And we also had quite some impact mentioned by Satomi already on the World Economic Forum, for example, but mainly also for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was kind of also target of the global assessment. Also, the Global Biodiversity Outlook was one of the targets of, let's say, the things we have been doing in the global assessment. It was a 1,200 pages document in the end, and I would say it was the first overall coverage, and what I think is very important, we had a good inclusion of ILK and IPLC, so indigenous local knowledge, the local community part, which is the first time I think it was really integrated into such an assessment. We had this, for example, in the pollination one, which was launched 2016, but it was a separate chapter, which leads me now to what we are going to do in the potentially do in the second global assessment, because this global, indigenous knowledge part is quite an important component there. So that's all for the previous one. I hope many of you know it anyhow. It can be downloaded to get an impression on what it was. And the aim now, if you can take the next slide, for the next global assessment is, of course, to update things and also to look at the gaps we had, things we can do better, or things which have been missing. So next slide. I still have the same slide here, so okay, well, next one, please. But first, maybe some background. So the scoping process itself, which is ongoing right now, that's why we are here. So the plenary in IPBES 10 has approved the scoping process for consideration by the plenary at IPBES 11, which will be in December this year, for a second global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services, in accordance with the procedures for the preparation of IPBES deliverables and based on initial scoping report. That's the one which was done in plenary in last year in Bonn in the plenary, which was kind of starting point now for the process. Next slide. For this scoping process, there has been a selection of scoping experts, so you have to be nominated like in the normal assessment process, but only for the scoping only. And we selected, well, there was IPBES, MAP and Bureau and others, 41 scoping experts out of 240 nominations. They were selected and in response to a call. And we had an online introductory meeting, which was in March this year. And there was a meeting now for the entire team physically in Monaco. Nice place, bit expensive, so it was nice for many other partners, but for VIOC partners it's a bit difficult because it's really expensive and you have to pay yourself. That's just a sideline. So April 8 to 10, hosted by the Oceanographic Institute of Monaco. That's the photo here, with Prince Albert in the center. So he was kind of the host there, making many things possible. And also all of the co-chairs of the previous assessment have been there. So 2 plus the one which is MAP member, which is myself. So the 3 of us, that's Sandra Diaz, Eduardo Brondicio, and myself. So we could all, let's say, reunify there in this meeting after some years of, let's say, where we haven't met. So it's a kind of also a nice personal thing again that we met again after some years. And now the scoping report, this is around 6 pages, which you might know already, or maybe at least you should read afterwards. Is open for external review starting May 29, so already ongoing until the June 25. Next slide. The timeline, some things I mentioned already. So we are now in this review part. We had dialogue meetings with indigenous local knowledge just recently. There will be meetings, well, it was the day before yesterday. There will be meetings, dialogue meetings with national focal points and stakeholders next week, June 11 and 12. Early July, there will be consideration of external review comments by MAP and Bureau. So we hope to get many comments from you or whoever it is, from the stakeholders, from all people who are interested. And MAP and Bureau will, let's say, consider these ones, discuss them. Then we will finalize the scoping report, taking comments from external review into account, processing final government review in October, and in December, consideration of scoping report by IPBES 11. So that's the timeline. If then it's through the plenary, then the next stage starts with the year 1 of the global assessment, the second global assessment, which will be first, of course, nomination of authors, co-chairs, CLAs and LAs, just a normal process. And we hope to start sometime next year, maybe around in a year from now. Next slide. So presentation of the scoping report in a kind of nutshell style. Next slide, please. So that's how it looks like. We have the scope and rationale in part 1, geographic coverage, temporal coverage, and methodological approaches. In part 2 is a chapter outline, and 3 is a timetable for the assessment itself. Next slide, please. So in part 1, scoping and rationale, the overall objective to assess relevant knowledge, which has become available since the first global assessment, and whether the needed transformations have been initiated to achieve societal goals of sustainability and living in harmony with nature. That's the overall objective. Specific ones: support governments and stakeholders in implementing the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development, and the Paris Agreement. This is one point. The next one is support the assessment of progress towards the 2030 targets and 2050 goals of the GBF, the Biodiversity Framework, and the SDGs and targets. And number C, provide the scientific and technical basis for the follow-up after 2030 of GBF and to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So many things where this second assessment should flow into. It will finish in 2028, I think is the plan. So still just in time for these other things to happen for the GBF continuation and the SDGs. Next slide, please. So the second global assessment will build on the findings of prior assessments by critically reviewing new evidence, not just repeating old things. Sometimes it might be important as a baseline on status and trends, direct, indirect drivers, consequences for people and nature. It will evaluate new information on the urgency of action, which was a kind of also gap identified. The urgency part was maybe a bit underdeveloped in this first global assessment. And new evidence on scenarios highlighting pathways for meeting global societal goals. Then leading by example, highlighting positive examples, showing enabling conditions for success and indicating ways to amplify or scale up to achieve global goals. Fourth one is address critical gaps highlighted in the first global assessment. There was a whole list of gaps we had there in the end, research gaps. The last 3 or 4 pages was kind of shopping list, so to say. And important components which also have been highlighted in the plenary meeting: the oceans, so the whole marine sector, differentiating among regions, as there is no set of regional assessments this time, contrary to the last first global assessment where we could at least somehow rely on the regional ones. So we have to include the regional aspects here. Distribution of NCP, so nature's contributions to people among different societal groups, including gender aspects. Potential tipping points, hot topic nowadays, such as the discussion in the EU level is quite going in this direction. So some of our politicians from Germany say it's much more urgent to work on climate because biodiversity doesn't reach any tipping point right now in the near future. Was a statement of a German member of parliament in Brussels just yesterday. So potential tipping points and interactions among multiple drivers and urban issues. So some of the gaps we had, or some of the things have to be developed much further. Highlight the roles of different actors, governments, indigenous people and local communities, the private sector, and civil society. And have a dedicated chapter on multiple knowledge systems with a focus on indigenous people and local communities. This is one of the results also from the last plenary, because there was kind of a movement for some countries, to have a independent assessment only on this. But in the end, this wasn't agreeable as a kind of assessment on its own, but it was agreed there is a dedicated chapter on this issue in this next global assessment. Next slide, please. The coverage, of course, both regional and global dimensions in an integrated manner, which is really a challenge, because before we only had the global, we could rely on some regional work done before, all biogeographic and oceanographic zones, and main focus on global or transregional processes, trends, and issues, while highlighting critical vulnerabilities and connections of particular regions. The temporal coverage reference period for reporting and monitoring progress of GBF, which is 2011 to 2020, in line with the Global Biodiversity Framework. Time frame for analysis, the current status trends up to 2028, going back as far as 50 years. and plausible future pathways for 2100. We focus on the period 2030 to 2050. Also in the last global assessment, we also had the last 50 years, but starting from 1970 to 2019. So it's something like this was a kind of, now we're shifting nearly 10 years further to in the future, something like this. Looking at long-term historical data as an information source for possible baselines and contemporary reference states. So the issue of baselines is a quite important one, and oftentimes we have moving baselines or we're lacking baselines, which makes it very hard to look in trends, for example. Next slide. Methodology, so drawn scientific literature, that was always the case, of course. Indigenous local knowledge was also quite pronounced already in the first global assessment, and grey literature was a bit treated greyishly. Maybe it's a very consistent term in this context, but you have to, let's say, dig up more of this grey literature, which is oftentimes quite important, especially when it comes to, let's say, local experiences, which might be there in many different languages, in very, let's say, local journals and publications and local outlets. This is a real challenge. We did something for Germany right now, looking at grey literature only in Germany, but only in Germany means you have thousands of interesting publications or reports, which is very hard to cover all, but at least we try to get the essence, the most important ones. And I think it's especially important here in relation to this good example approach, leading by example I mentioned before. Of course, we build on IPBES assessments. The completed ones are the ones to be completed during the development of the second global. So mentioned by Satomi was the one which will start in next year or the year after, which is a planning one and connectivity, or the one on the monitoring, which is now just that the coach has elected the last week or something like this. And of course, the completed ones. So trying to integrate all the knowledge there and not to repeat these things. So heavily rely on the things done before and just make reference to them. Then produced by an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary team of experts with diverse backgrounds, disciplines, and knowledge systems. That was always the case, of course, including indigenous local knowledge systems, ensuring regional and gender balance. That's always a big challenge when it comes to the author teams. So we need, of course, nominations from all across the globe for all different disciplines, all different sectors in order to really reach this kind of balance. Now, this meeting is a European-centered one. I guess Europe and North America, the WEOC region, is always extremely overrepresented in terms of nominations, while other UN regions are normally much less so, especially Africa and also Asia, to quite some extent, always lacks lots of people. So we have to get more people from there as well, which also means if you want to be active there, it's also a lower chance to be selected because of the high competition, but it doesn't matter. Just give it a try if you want to become an author later, because you need oftentimes combinations of different traits, which some people might have as exceptional kind of combinations, which would be nice. Important component, never in any CV, that's my private remark from the global assessment, the social compatibility of people. That's something that's very hard to judge on, but it's quite essential to have a process which is going nicely and smoothly. Okay, we are going to apply the IPBES conceptual framework, which hopefully many of you know. We also want to repeat this in the global, in the second global, and identify and prioritize key gaps in relevant knowledge and data. Next slide, please. So the chapter outline, this global assessment will have 5 main chapters. Setting the scene, then the ILK chapter. As I said before, there was a special decision also in the last plenary. I go into detail in a moment. Status and trends, pathways, and options for action. So this is the overall outline. Next slide. Starting now with chapter 1, setting the scene, which is a kind of, let's say, starting, but also kind of summary. It wants to describe how the assessment applies to IPBES conceptual framework. So it will be laid out again and updated to some extent, its element and their connections. We present classifications and typologies, for example, the driver typology. Then how has the context changed since the first global assessment? Will be one chapter as a kind of starting reference point. Explain the evolving international policy context regarding biodiversity and nature's contributions to people. And present the main areas of emphasis of the second global assessment as an intro. No? So which is interconnections between conceptual framework, elements, processes, and regions of the world. Critical regional differences. This also, as I said, a bit of a challenge because we have to cover the regional and the global scale. Similarities, interdependencies, and vulnerabilities. Rights perspective. So we, of course, we need a lot of also people with a legal background. Human rights, environmental rights, rights of nature. and social and environmental justice, including existing inequities in the distribution of benefits and burdens. Then, in the setting the scene chapter, the structure of the assessment will be explained to some extent, and we will lay out the narrative arc of the assessment and introduce cross-cutting themes. Next slide, please. So maybe just an additional comment after we did the global assessment, the first one, with some, let's say, time which has passed. It was very interesting for myself to read again our chapter 1, which was a really good kind of treasure of lots of information. So after some 2 or 3 years of a gap, I tended to use this quite often because it was really good work. So I still am not convinced of our work. Of course, we have done this a bit subjective, I have to admit, but it's always nice to rediscover what you should have known already some time ago, just as a kind of footnote. Chapter 2, Indigenous Local Knowledge. So here, this is the special chapter which we try to integrate across the entire assessment. Also has a kind of, let's say, its own chapter level, which also is a certain kind of highlight. I mentioned before we had this in the pollination, but there it was a chapter which was rather written in isolation from the rest. So here we try to do both highlighting and connecting. So we want to explore the diverse and plural values and worldviews of indigenous peoples and local communities worldwide. Assess the ways that indigenous peoples and local communities contribute to nature and the co-production of nature's contributions to people. Assess the impacts, pressures, and drivers affecting IPLC in relation to biodiversity and their lands. Analyze and provide policy options on ways to support and revitalize ILPC contributions to nature and nature's contributions to people. And coordinate content of this chapter with the coverage of ILK in all other chapters. So it's a kind of, let's say, two-way process, which we plan that the authors, to be exact, try to summarize findings all across the assessment concerning IPLC and ILK, and also to, let's summarize this in this chapter and highlight this kind of block or this kind of information set on this issue in one highlighted chapter. So having it both. It's a kind of summary only with this special aspect. Next slide, please. Status and trends, like in the first global assessment, is similar here. It consists of an introduction, summary sections, and 4 interrelated subchapters focusing on the 4 main elements of the framework. So last time we had only 3. We didn't have a good quality of life subchapter, which is a new thing now. Then we had nature, we had direct indirect drivers, and nature's contributions to people as subchapters of this chapter, which made it a very huge chapter because each subchapter in the first assessment was in the size of a normal chapter like the other one. So we had 5 chapters, actually we had 8 if we look at it in more detail. So it's a matter of structure, but it's one component, status of trends of these many different components of the framework. So what is going to be done there? Describe status and trends in the 4 elements using indicators to present the trends, elaborating on causes of observed changes and on connections between the elements. There's something. It's always highlighted those things which can be done better than in the first global assessment, or at least at some same level. Focus on the global level, of course. Also highlight regional status and trends when there are important differences among regions, which means you also have to screen all the regions for these issues and see whether it's consistent with the global trend, and if not, highlight this one and also maybe elaborate why it is the case. Provide a synthetic systems level summary, highlighting the connections across subchapters and addressing the degree to which the observed status and trends in the 4 elements are consistent with meeting international policy goals and targets. So that's quite a challenge. This chapter 3 is a huge thing, and I guess it will have to be something like, I don't know, 15, something like 60, 70 authors maybe, if you take all the 4 subchapters. Next slide. Chapter 4, Future Pathways. That's something you also had chapter 4 also in the first global assessment, 4 and 5 actually, on this pathway issue. For setting the stage, we built on the scenarios and models assessment, which was the first one besides the pollination one published in 2016, so nearly 10 years back now, or 8 years. Explain how plausible futures will be assessed using the variety of quantitative and qualitative methods, and including different worldviews and knowledge systems. So that's the stage setting. Urgency of action is a specific highlight or headline here, because we have to look at the urgency more pronouncedly than compared to the first global assessment. Highlight the pace and magnitude of change necessary to avoid further biodiversity loss, a multiple crisis in the future. And we all know this kind of time gap with things. If we do things today, the effects of our activities, negative or positive, might take quite some time, and then it's always often too late to really counteract. Just look at the climate system. It takes so long to really modify this long-term trend because it's just simply already set for next 20, 30 years. It might be different biodiversity, but also there you have this kind of long-term thing highlighting the pace. And again, trying to, let's say, emphasize the urgency we have, although we don't see it right away, which is also one of the problems we have, the effects, the positive effects of the things we are doing right now. So emphasize how future pathways can result in uneven distribution of impacts, costs, and benefits for various regions and social groups, including for IPLC. Then looking at plausible transformative pathways. So plausibility means just consistent pathways, not prescriptive necessarily, just exploring the different options. So describe for pathways and examine their synergies and trade-offs from a nexus perspective and across social groups. We have the nexus assessment about to be finished quite soon, which surely will really go into this one here and into this chapter. Assess how different drivers and their combinations contribute to achieving biodiversity and sustainability goals based on policy and management intervention. In the first global, we had the combinations as one component of drivers, but also quite an emphasis on the drivers themselves, which might be better done in the future by better integrating these ones. Next slide, please. The last two slides on the structure, options for action, has 2 slides in total. So consider options for actions by all actors at all levels to advance goals, global societal goals is the title there, sorry. Learn from past action is the first part. Review evidence on the reasons for not achieving biodiversity goals in previous agreements. I mentioned one component, which is this kind of time component. It takes a long time sometimes. No? Evaluate the impact of biodiversity policies on different sectors of society. Identify gaps, conflicts, and mismatches among policy instruments, regulations, financial, and other incentives. Second component, build on successful examples. I mentioned this before already. Identify successful examples and promising options for actions and synthesize evidence on enabling conditions. That's also one part, as I mentioned before, grey literature might play quite a role, but it's very hard to really have a good overview on grey literature. Because it's grey, it's not so easy to get hold of it, of course. But only basing the statements on this published things or the scientific Western world approach is just a small part of the reality. And I think we have to be much broader than only this. Then the options for action part, take an inclusive approach regarding options, including regulatory, legal, economic, financial. Then looking at education, direct intervention, market creation, cross-sectoral approaches, and individual and collective action, etc. Which also shows for such a chapter need a broad set of people with lots of expertise. So it might be even a large team of people working on this in order to cover these topics and to do it in a geographically balanced way all across the globe, of course. Next slide. 3 more components of this options part, the monitoring. Of course, examine, it will be based on the monitoring assessment, which will be finished, I guess, 2 years before the global will be finished, the second global. Examine how to improve the monitoring of changes in nature. Also some components mentioned by, just a while ago by Rainer, the monitoring parts of biodiversity, just to make a reference to biodiversity at least once, to being polite in this meeting on biodiversa. Examine to improve the monitoring, as I said, nature's contributions to people, good quality of life, and the drivers of change relative to actions. So it's the monitoring of the drivers, for example. Financing is an important component. Consider options for prioritizing areas for investing attached to GBF, protection, capacity building, and evaluate enabling factors and barriers for action by a diversity of stakeholders. And then the post-2030 component, outline options for policy targets and actions relevant to developing post-2030 policy frameworks. So I guess this also will be a major impact the second global assessment should have and will have on the future development of what we do beyond 2013. We published 2028. It's just in time, maybe a bit late, but it's just in time maybe to really get this kind of, let's say, implemented. Okay, next slide. Yes, so I thought I'm through, but I wasn't sure whether something coming. So thank you very much for your patience, and I hope it gives some insights. There is more information even on the scoping document itself. As I said before, it's 6 pages, And if you are going to review this, maybe some hints from my experience from the first global assessment. Don't push all your wishes into this scoping document. It's nice to have all the wishes there, and if they go through plenary, which is one bottleneck, of course, the more detailed it is, the more discussion we might have in plenary, the longer it takes, it might be more complicated. That's one component. The other one, all these details, if they go through plenary, then the authors have to deal with all of these. And if you have lots of, let's say, shopping lists, which we partly had in the first global, there is not much freedom left of things you might wish to include yourself as an author. And we need some kind of freedom also for the authors to develop things. I think it's quite an important component of freedom. So also the component of having fun in the process is to bring in a bit of your own subjective component. That's one thing I would really like to ask you. If there are comments, you say, okay, there's one or two important things really missing, that's important. But it's not about nitty-gritty details. For example, you have to monitor the crabs of the southern Antarctic zone. I think there are no crabs there, but never mind. So something like this is too much level of detail. So always keep in mind that we have a process there which goes to plenary, and the more detailed it is, the more complicated discussions might be. And also there is a team of our colleagues out there, maybe some of you will be there then in the future, who also, let's say, appreciate if not every tiny detail is already prescribed for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for this presentation and the precious insights that you shared at the end. Okay, so now it's time for questions, if you have time. Thank you, Typhaine, for showing back. So you can raise your hands or write your question on the chat. So we have a question that hasn't been answered. That is, where can we find or get a list of the scoping experts who we're selecting during this process? Maybe Joseph, this question is for you.
I can't say, Satomi, do you know is this kind of publicly available, this list of experts who have been in the meeting? I don't know, actually.
So sorry, I couldn't see the question exactly. Where can I find the question? Sorry.
Yeah, it's in the chat, so I will read it again. Can we find or get the list of the scoping experts who were selected during this the process? Sorry.
Yes, exactly. So sorry, I couldn't really hear you, Constance. Sorry, at the initial stage. So yes, all the selected scoping experts are on our website. So if you go to our website and click on assessment and go to second global assessment, and under that you can find the list of experts. So then, yeah, I think we got a total of 41 experts.
And as I said, out of a set of 200, I think 250, something like this, nominations, just to give you the kind of context. I mentioned this briefly before.
Okay.
I think Lars he raised his hand. Okay. Maybe Lars, you can put your question in the comments or the Q&A section, please.
Can you give him the...
Yep. I think you can talk, Lars. Okay, never mind. So yeah, Lars asked a question, which is the first global assessment had a review or stock taking of the implementation of the Aichi targets, as far as I recall. Does this too? Assessment experts expect to have the same regard to the GBF targets? Sorry. So.
I think it will be difficult because it depends on how far we are in the process. Now that the targets are for 2030, as far as I remember. So you can maybe, like we did before in the Aichi targets, you might be able to make some kind of, let's say, estimate on how high is the chance to get there. But it wasn't made explicit so far as I remember from the document. But it might be one component it might be interesting to at least raise as an issue, by the way. But I'm not sure whether it's maybe somewhere in the document. I will just check myself that I find it. But it's a good idea, actually, and a good component to just see where we are on the pathway to 2030 concerning the targets. And then 2028, which means the analysis until 2027, might at least give some indication where we got somehow going. Yeah, okay, that's all I can say at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's another question about if there's any information about future collaborative plans between IPBES and IPCC.
Yes, maybe I can take that question if it's okay, Seth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes. So it's actually the collaboration is ongoing. So as you might remember that we have issued a call for submission of ideas on the collaboration between IPCC and IPBES. And regarding the written documentation, the latest would be the document which was submitted considered at IPBES 10. And then we will also produce the updated information document on the collaboration between IPCC and IPBES at IPBES 11. So if you're looking for the written document, then maybe you can visit our website and check on the IPBES plenaries. But then, as I said, this is an ongoing effort. So if you have a good idea, then please also let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add something on the last question? It was just checking the document about the Kunming targets, etc. In chapter 3, status and trends, if you look at the complete document, the scoping document under point 28, there is this reference to meeting international policy goals and targets, including Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So it's there already. So it's one of the components in the status and trends chapter, which is a very big chapter, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we have one question on how can we contribute to the monitoring assessment? So this will be during the external review, I guess. Satomi, you can let us know more about this.
Yes, it also depends on who you are, meaning like if you are scientists or policymakers, then probably different roles you can play. But then if you are the, let's say, scientist, then yes, please review the draft assessment during the external review period, which was, I think the first one will come early next year, if I remember correctly. So yes, and if you're part of the government, and please, review the document submitted at IPBES 11, which is the earliest for us, and contribute if you have any input. Thank you.
Just as an addition, so all the offers are of course pre-selected already. So the co-chairs are there, and also the set of potential offers was already pre-selected. Now it's the co-chairs and then maybe later CLAs to make the final decision on who will be the offers selected in the end for the process. So, but this is already closed for quite some time in case this is your question. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess if there's no more still left, maybe you can let like 1 minute.
Yeah. Yeah, we can.
This is the last moment if you want to ask a question, and then we will go to another section on how you can become an external reviewer.
There was a comment in the chat, the webinar chat, would be great to invite next time IUCN CEM. Just a comment, yeah. I don't know to whom it refers to Biodiversa for the meeting, or what's the context actually? Maybe somebody can explain this.
Well, if this person wants to talk, because the webinar was not on invitation, it was open to everyone. It was on the Biodiversa Plus newsletter and on the website and on socials. So, of course, we would be happy to have IUC and CEM. And maybe next time we will point it out to them, and maybe you can send us like an email address then. And if you want to speak, please do. Okay. So maybe we should go on, and if you have any question, we will have time after the next section to answer them. So, I am Typhaine QUINQUIS. I'm the Internationalization Officer of Biodiversa Plus, and I used to be in the technical support unit of IPBES on knowledge generation catalysis. And I'm going to talk to you about the practicalities on how to become an external reviewer. So as you can see in this screen, so this is the kind of the calendar for an IPBES assessment. So right now, so you can see they have 4 phases, and right now we are at the first phase. So which is request and scope. So the request for the second global assessment was made and accepted, and now we have a detailed scope. Scoping report, which has an external review from May 29th to June 25th. And then this, taking into consideration your comments, the expert will draft the final scoping report, which will be under consideration at the 11th plenary of IPBES, which will be in December 2024. Then this assessment will enter into the phase 2 and 3, which is the nomination and selection of experts. And so it will be, I guess, at the beginning of 2025. And for this, I think probably Biodiversa Plus will do another webinar to help you on how you can get selected. And then after the experts are going to be selected, the technical support unit is going to be selected as well as the co-chairs. There will be, the assessment will be under preparation between IPBES 11 and IPBES 15 in 2028 for now. And then, so it will be approved at IPBES 15 in 2028. And then after the assessment, there's also a post-assessment promotion for the co-chairs. So right now we are at phase 1. And so to let you know a bit about how to become an external reviewer, first you need to click on the link of this slide or go on the IPBES website and register. And then you can click on this link, and you will have access to the form to become an external reviewer. So you answer these categories and submit registration. And then once you submit your registration, you will have this page on the left, and you will also have an email sent to the email address you registered with. And you will have all the information below. So the scoping reports, which should not be shared or quote because it's confidential, the Excel template to note your comments, and the link to deposit the Excel file you completed. So regarding the comments, it should be in English and via this templates, otherwise it won't be accepted. And each comment should be entered in a single row. Regarding guidance on the comments, so as Seb said, I think it should not be too much detail, but if a big information is not on the report, maybe you should comment on it, but taking into consideration that this will go through the plenary, and I think from what we've heard, the shorter the scoping report, the better it is. And this is my interpretation, of course. So this I showed you, I'm putting an Excel picture of the Excel file you have to complete. So above you can see that comments, there's example on comments, and you can also see there's 8 columns. So the page it's the comment starts on, the line it starts on, the page it ends, and line it ends, the comments, and the name of the reviewer. Once you register to access those files, you will also have an email. In the email you will receive, you will also have a link to online dialogues organized by IPBES next week. So for the dialogues with government representative, it will be on June 11th. And for dialogue with stakeholders, it will be on the next day, June 12th. So that's it on my side. If you have any question, please let us know.
I feel like maybe we haven't correctly answered one of the first questions. Someone was asking if you could recommend for both Biodiversa and IPBES some newsletters that allow you to get information about your activities, as well as general updates on biodiversity issues, or maybe other useful biodiversity newsletters. So Satomi, you have answered these questions for IPBES, but maybe Rainer, could you recommend, is there something you can recommend for Biodiversa?
The question was on the relations between Biodiversa Plus and IPBES. Of course, we give support to our scientists funded within our projects or other contacts. We do additional capacity building events. Even this activity today, this webinar, is part of our activities to support, of course, the scientific community and other stakeholders to participate in the IPBES process and to bring in their expertise and knowledge from research into the IPBES process. And on the other hand side, we also seek, of course, to integrate information, knowledge gaps we receive from, for example, IPBES assessments or other IPBES work into our work streams. And for this also we use from time to time expert input, of course, in our processes. For example, when we launch new calls or flagship programs. All relevant information, how to integrate the scientific community, of course, will be announced in our newsletters. So we send you the information about our newsletter in the chat. But if you have additional questions or needs on this, please raise your hand or write something in the chat.
Thank you, Rainer. Okay,
we have a comment from Julie Delcroix.
Yeah, I can read it. Julie says that to clarify, if you add comments as a reviewer, you should also come to the dialogue session, government or other stakeholders, or could it be one or the other? Like the 2 sessions suggested for each type of stakeholder is to accommodate availabilities or for other reasons?
Yes, thank you very much for that reminder. Exactly. So we're organizing our, let's say, official dialogue meetings next week. So I think it was exactly on 11th of June for government representatives and 12th for stakeholders. So if you are part of the government, then please try to join on the 11th session, where we have 2 sessions. One is in the morning in European time from 10 to 12. And then the other one in the afternoon from 4 to 6. And where we are also trying to provide some interpretation. So if you're are not native English speaker, then if you prefer to have interpreted the language, then maybe it may be another good option for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe just as an add-on, so and the 11th, that's Chinese, Russian, English, is it right? And on the 12th, it's French, Spanish, English. Satomi, am I right? I think something like this. It's not all languages in all the meetings, I guess, no?
Exactly. So if I may correct a little bit, yes, exactly. So Seb, as Seb said, those 3 languages for morning session on 11th, and the Spanish and French are the afternoon session on 11th. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for this really clear and precise presentations. And please don't hesitate to contact us, Typhaine or I, if you had any more questions. And I will precise here that the webinar has been registered and will be available on Biodiversa webpage. We will send an email with the link, to everyone that registered to this webinar. Thank you so much, and have a very good day, everyone.